Let me say something about our public safety ecosystem. It is unique. Like what happened in most jurisdictions across the country post-COVID, we experienced a violent crime spike in 2023. When I was last here, I explained how we would drive down those trends, and it is working. Today, compared to 2023, burglaries are down 34%, theft, motor vehicle theft, 37%, homicide down 44%, robberies down 60%, and carjackings are down 71%. Overall, violent crime is down 53% compared to 2023. And in the recent federal surge, we accelerated those gains, including a 1-month reduction in carjackings of 75%. As I've told you, we're putting every resource necessary towards public safety. I've authorized the chief to use the overtime necessary to make sure we have adequate police on the streets. We spent 1.8 million hours of overtime last year at a cost to us of $75 million. I've also reported to you previously that we engage regularly with regional and federal partnerships, including the United States Attorney, the FBI, and the ATF. And that's why we will continue to use enhanced federal resources as outlined in my mayor's order, creating the DC Safe and Beautiful Emergency Task Force.
It is ironic that the same people who cut $1.1 billion out of your budget 4 months later are saying, we're going to take over the city because you're not taking care of law enforcement.
That's correct, Congressman. And it was especially problematic because it came mid-year. To cut $1 billion with 12 months is bad enough, but to cut it with 6 months, it's almost impossible.
And Mayor, tell me where that $1.1 billion, where did it come from?
It came from every one of our sectors. And when you have to cut that much money.
The source, was that from D.C. taxpayers?
100% local dollars.
Okay, so they cut $1.1 billion of the tax money paid by D.C. residents.
That's correct.
They cut that from your budget so that you can't provide as much law enforcement and police officers to patrol these streets. Is that right?
That's right.
And Chairman Mendelson, you mentioned earlier that it had about $83 million underfunding of the police department directly. Is that correct?
That is correct. There's an emergency planning and security fund that Congress appropriates every year for. It is supposed to fully reimburse our MPD for its work in connection with the federal presence, whether it's demonstrations or escorts for the.
I get it. There's a protest down here every week, every couple of days. Yes. So I compliment you on your ability to try to deal with that, and that's not D.C.'s problem. That's the country, because this is the place we come to exercise our First Amendment rights, to petition our government. So that's a lot of your problem, is the fact that you are our nation's capital, and this is where we come to complain, right? We complain to our federal government, and you have to deal with that. Attorney General Schwab, are you familiar with the Posse Comitatus Act?
I am, sir.
Your mic is not on.
Yes, the Posse Comitatus Act is a law, long-standing law in our country that makes clear that in our country, military are not engaged in policing American citizens on American soil.
Absolutely, but isn't that what President Trump is doing right now, bringing in the military to police the civilian population in this district? That's exactly what he's doing. Is that your view as well?
Well, sir, I've filed a lawsuit that involves that very issue in terms of the legality.
I read that. That's why I asked you the question.
And so while a lawsuit is pending, I'm not going to talk about the specifics of the lawsuit or the merits of it, but I am very concerned about the law of our country being followed, especially when it puts the district and district residents in harm's way.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Look, so now we have armed military on the streets here in D.C. because they cut your budget so you can't hire more police, and also to recruit more police officers. That's suffering as well. And yet I see that not only is the military being politicized, coming in here and supporting one president's agenda, but they're also suffering the humiliation of having to go pick up trash and do landscaping and spreading mulch, things like that. That is not what we ask of our sons and daughters when they put on that uniform. We should treat them with more respect than this president is treating them right now.
Congressional oversight is vital to rehabilitate the District of Columbia from its chronic crime epidemic and restore law and order. Failed leadership, soft on crime policies, rampant corruption has left D.C. more dangerous than war-torn Baghdad. This committee's investigation reveals Metro PD falsified crime statistics while the Attorney General's office seals the juvenile criminals records to protect those so-called minors. But let's be honest, they aren't kids. These are 24-year-old criminals. By allowing adults to be tried as minors, Washington, D.C. is aiding and abetting criminal activity that threatens the lives of residents, visitors, and everyone who works in our nation's capital. Washington, D.C. must earn back the trust of President Trump and Congress, but it does not happen just by blatantly manipulating crime statistics, seeking politically motivated litigation, and spending irresponsibly.
I'd like to talk about the National Guard deployment here in D.C. and the cost of it. Now, Mr. Jackson, as you said, I believe that the D.C. deployment is going to cost over $200 million, correct?
Correct. That's projection.
Let's see how this money is being used. Trump says it's for fighting crime. But here's a guardsman carrying trash. Here's a guardsman mowing the lawn. Here's a very nice gentleman, a guardsman carrying a leaf blower. Honorable work, certainly. But this is not why the taxpayers fund the National Guard.
We can't pull out a full map of Washington, D.C., but there are other corruption hotspots across the district. Now, let's look right next door to the White House. Here is the headquarters of the Office of Management and Budget. Just next door, OMB ordered the unlawful freezing of more than $425 billion in congressionally authorized funds. This ovulates the law. It's corruption. It's a crime. This has hurt communities in D.C. and across the country. They're blocking funds for energy, education, law enforcement, and much more. Now, let's go down the map a few miles south. Here is the Department of Homeland Security, where Secretary Noam has ordered unlawful deportations and unleashed masked federal agents to harm innocent people across the country. And we have no idea, by the way, of who's following that and who's not. Who's following what rule, who is not. What we do know is that the legal rights of people and due process is being ignored. If we go up the map back to the north on Maryland Avenue, we have the Department of Education, also in D.C., more crimes and corruption. Here, the Trump administration illegally froze billions of dollars of K-12 and adult education funding. They even froze funding for mental health. And they're trying to illegally dissolve the agency in violation of the law. Again, more crimes and corruption in Washington, D.C. This would devastate children across the country, especially those with disabilities. Now, if we go back downtown, here's the Department of Commerce, where Trump and the Secretary are breaking the law by illegally imposing tariffs without congressional approval. And all is being done in violation of the law, according to the U.S. Court of Appeals. And finally, if we go across the river, another part of D.C., to the Pentagon, Secretary Hegseth is politicizing the military. He leaked classified information, putting Americans in uniform at risk, and he's illegally seized control of the National Guard and ordered soldiers to illegally engage in law enforcement activities. And so we can map D.C., we can map where crimes is happening, we can map where corruption is happening. This, of course, is all we know, just the tip of the iceberg. Now, we could list nearly every agency across the government and every federal building on a map at where crimes and corruption are happening in the district.
And you're strapped in as a result of policies and rulings and law that prevent you in many instances from being the mayor that you want to be every day without being constrained. So I just want to say that on the record. It's easy for a lot of people to point fingers, but until you sat in that seat and had to make those decisions, it's very difficult. And one of your arms have been tied behind your back. Let's make no mistake about that. I want to thank all of you who are here, but one thing that I want to do is to go back and underscore the comments of Delegate Eleanor Holmes Norton. I brought this up at the last meeting that we had here on the District of Columbia, and that is the fact that at the end of the day, so much of this can be traced back to the imposition of policy on a governed people without their participation. Let me repeat that. The imposition of policy without participation by the citizens, the Americans. It's just as it was with the Boston Tea Party, comes down to taxation without representation. When you can't even fight for yourself, stand for yourself, vote for yourself, that's wrong.